Hello and a very warm welcome to all the viewers of Detox, that is Disruptive Literacy Talks. And this is Tanmay Prakash, your host of the session. Detox aims at coming together in eradicating illiteracy and focusing upon foundational literacy and numeracy, as committed under Sustainable Development Goal 4 and in India's national education policy as well. We at Detox focus to educate and make literate all the out of the school children and the underprivileged adults. Education is a continuous and a creative process. It aims to develop the capacities latent in human nature and to coordinate their expressions for the enrichment and the progress of the society. And moreover, we believe in disrupting the status quo when best is not the enough. And moving on to today's session, it will be based upon sustainable development and foundational learning skills. And with this, I would like to introduce you with the speaker of the session, Ms. Chandrika Bahadur, Director SDG Academy, who will be speaking upon the topic Mission 4.7 Teaching Children Fundamentals of Sustainable Development, Global Citizenship, and 21st Century Skills as an Essential Foundational Learning Skill. Chandrika Bahadur is the Director of SDG Academy and the Vice President of Education at the UN SDSM. She is also chair of the Lancet Commission on COVID-19 India Task Force. Previously, she was president at SDSN Association from 2008 to 2011. She was advisor to the chairman and the managing director at Reliance Industries, where she helped to set up Reliance Foundation. From 2001 to 2008, Chandrika worked on the United Nations in different roles. In her last assignment, she was a policy advisor at UNDP's Bureau of Development Policies in New York, working in Africa to help ministries of finance and planning align their strategies to the Millennium Development Goal across 20 countries. From 2003 to 2006, she was the part of the leadership team of the UN Millennium Project and advisory group convened by the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan to recommend strategies for the MDGs. She prior teaching experience at Harvard and Columbia University. We at Detox are glad to have Ms. Chandrika Bahadur with us. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to Detox.
Thank you so much, Tanmay. Thank you for having me.
And with this, I would like to also tell you that we have Dr. Sunita Gandhi with us as the discussant and the presenter of the session. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to Detox.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Now the session is over to you both.
Okay, thank you, Tanmay. So I'd like to start by asking Chandrika ji to explain about what she does, because she's had this tremendous background of working with the UN goals of SDG, and here now, taking that whole mission forward in India. So with those tremendous with that tremendous background and tremendous credentials, I think we'd like to hear from her about what she does and how it pans out for her, and what are the things that we can learn from her work at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi, and thank you again for inviting me to the talk. It's an honor to be here. Let me start by saying that, first of all, I think the focus on literacy is fantastic. So congratulations on Detox. I think it's a matter of absolute critical importance, not just in India, but in all countries around the world, to make sure that our young people are prepared for the world in however we define preparedness. The work that I do at SDSN is essentially around at the intersection of education and sustainable development. And what does that mean? So when we talk about sustainable development, it's a very, very broad field and can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. We are guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a set of global goals that were adopted at the United Nations by member countries in 2015. And these define a whole set of objectives that are related to three broad areas. So they're related to economic prosperity, which focuses around making so reducing poverty, ensuring nobody goes hungry, increasing incomes, and trying to reduce inequalities, building prosperity. So there's a whole set of economic related goals which are crucial for making sure that people have a better standard of living around the world. So that's one. The second pillar around which the SDGs are focused is the pillar of social policy. So focus on education, focus on health, focus on gender equality, issues that increase both people's capacity to participate in their communities and their lives and to lead more fulfilling lives. That's the second pillar. And then the third pillar is around caring for the planet. And this focuses on climate change. It focuses on biodiversity, on ensuring clean energy, clean water. And together, these three pillars make up the basic framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. Together with the Paris Climate Agreement, which was also signed in 2015, these two frameworks are essentially defining global policy making right now. So that's the general context in which we work. So our role at the STS and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is to promote sustainable development, largely with universities around the world. So we are a network of about 1,500 universities globally, and we work with these universities to do a few things. One is to understand what are the policy challenges that countries are facing in promoting sustainable development, and trying to connect research that's happening in this area to policy making in those countries. So that's one area of work. And the second area of work is teaching sustainable development. How do we make sure that young people are equipped with the knowledge and skills that they need to actually make a change and make a difference? And for that, I direct the SDG Academy, which is an online learning portal for the SDGs. And I can always share the links later on through this conversation or other means. But I would encourage everyone to visit the sdgacademy.org, because you'll find a lot of content and a lot of material there which could be useful. So that's the general background of what we do. I want to come now to the issue of literacy and why I'm speaking today to you. And this is because late last year, we launched, in partnership with UNESCO and with the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens and the Center for Sustainable Development, Columbia University, we launched something called Mission 4.7. Now, Mission 4.7 is a movement that we started, which is inspired by the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is the goal on education, Target 7. And I want to just for a moment tell you what this target is, because it's a very wordy target, but it really does encapsulate a lot. So what 4.7 says is that we need to ensure that all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So this is a lot. And in a sense, what it also is, it's sort of, it's a small target. It comes after 6 other education targets that focus much more on access and quality of learning and the traditional topics that education talks about. But in a sense, this really provides a big punch, because what it is essentially saying is it's the link between education and all of the other sustainable development goals. And what it essentially acknowledges is that we're not going to achieve the sustainable development goals simply by signing on a piece of a document or talking about that. It has to come from change that is intergenerational. It has to come from a different way of thinking about the world and about the priorities that we as individuals set for ourselves as well as for the people around us as we go about living our lives. So it's a fairly deep and a difficult target, because it does cut across so much. It cuts across education systems, because it means that what we are teaching our children has to potentially change. It cuts across the how. How are we teaching our children? What are we asking them to prioritize? That changes. And it fundamentally also cuts across almost every other sector that's linked to the SDGs, because it essentially says that if we're looking at all of these very difficult, complicated issues, climate change, poverty reduction, gender equality, we need to make sure that young people know what these issues are and can process them in their minds, because these are complicated topics. They're not simple, and there are no easy right or wrong answers to any of them. So that's the framing and of the target itself. And so what we at Mission 4.7 are doing is we are trying to work with governments first to reiterate their commitment to 4.7 and their willingness to actually implement it. But then we're also helping them with the how. So we're developing and pulling together all of the work that's happened over several decades now on these topics, and trying to make these resources available to governments, but also to individuals, to organizations working in the education space, to say, if you want to do this seriously, this is how to go about it. And these are examples of what's worked. This is what the latest thinking on the issue is. This is what the science is telling us. This is what we've gathered from lessons from around the world. So that's the context of Mission 4.7. And coming more to sort of what this means for children. So when you talk about literacy for children, normally that encompasses the 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Understanding that children need to be able to interpret, and all of the measures of quality of education right now focus on exactly these 3. So if you look at the Pratham annual State of Education report that comes out every January, that measures learning outcomes, what it essentially measures is, can you read a complete sentence? Can you make sense of a paragraph? Can you solve a simple long division problem? Can you do basic multiplication? So all of those tests and all of the evaluation around quality of education is typically measured by whether or not a child is at their age equivalent grade competency level. So can they do the basics? And that equips them to be able to then learn higher level subjects and skills, right? So that's the understanding, that if you know your basics, then you're prepared to then go on to higher levels of learning. What we're talking about is something a little bit different. So what we're talking about are 3 broad, I would say, buckets of competencies that we believe contribute towards 4.7. The first is what I would categorize as what's commonly known in the literature as 21st century skills. The second is what is known as global citizenship education. And then the third is education for sustainable development. They're all fairly closely interconnected, but they're all also quite distinctly different. So I want to talk first about 21st century skills. And this was first really articulated by the US Department of Education in 2002, where they were basically doing a forward projection of what were the skills and what were the kind of jobs that would emerge in the future, and therefore what are the skills that people would need to have to be able to do those jobs well. And those were categorized in, again, 3 sets, and all the other work can fall into these 3 sets, though, of course, as Dr. Gandhi, as you and I were discussing just before we began, there are many frameworks and many ways to categorize 21st century skills. But the broad 3 categories are information and communication skills. So that is, can you access and process information? And can you communicate effectively, orally, in a written format? Can you get what you want to say across in a way that other people grasp and understand it? So that's the first set of skills. Why is this important? It's absolutely critical for the world that our young children are growing up in, because they have access to unlimited information, which was not true of a few generations ago, where knowledge was filtered and curated through the formal schooling system. That's no longer the case. So if you are a young person and you have access to Facebook, or you have access to Twitter, or you have access to the internet, just even that, you have unlimited information. And so a key skill is to distill that information, to be able to make sense of it, to know how to process it, how to access what you need, how to evaluate information that's there. Is it accurate? Is it fake news? Does it make sense? What are the sources? How do you? So this is a completely new set of skills that people didn't need 3 generations or 2 generations ago, but it's an essential skill today in navigating both life and work. The second bucket is what they call thinking and problem solving skills. Now, again, if you look back to the history of formal education, mass education, which really began first in Germany in the 1800s, but then really in the early part of the 20th century with a massive rollout where it became the norm that the universal school education was desirable and a stated policy goal of most governments. Once that began in the context of the industrial age, right? So at that time, the workforce that was needed was the workforce to man factories. As people moved out of agriculture, they moved into industry. And what did they do in industry? They manufactured things. And so there was a certain sense of skills that were needed there that didn't necessarily require they did require, of course, cognitive skills, but they were cognitive skills of a particular kind. We are moving into now the post-industrial era. So work now is going to be much more dictated by the needs and the influence of technology than pure manufacturing, because low-skill manufacturing jobs are being automated at an incredibly fast pace. So what is the value addition that people bring to the workforce now? And that is where the thinking and problem solving category of skills comes in, because now what is needed much more is to be able to understand what sort of information needs to be fed into machinery. How does one solve problems? So problem solving is a very critical element. Creativity at work. So you know how to basically tell machines what to do and how to basically solve problems that mechanically cannot be solved that easily, right? So that's where the cognitive skills would be needed. And then the third set of skills is what is broadly called interpersonal and self-directional skills. So these are both, this is how do you deal with people and how do you deal with yourself. And both of these are distinct but again related skills. So again, now when we're looking at the workforce, we're looking at the people that are succeeding are people that know how to bring different perspectives together, that know how to manage teams, that know how to work effectively in teams, they know how to collaborate, they know how to lead. And they also know, in order to be able to do all those things, they need to be able to know themselves well. They need to know their own strengths and weaknesses. They need to know how to respond, how to get motivated. A lot more autonomous work. The gig economy is here, so it means that a lot of people are now working for themselves. They're not in structured large organizations. And so they need to be able to navigate the workplace as individuals, less as part of large departments or structures. So this is a very quick overview of 21st century skills, but it began in 2002 in its articulation, and then there have been several other articulations of it. There was the OECD put out a Competencies Framework, which again said similar things. I won't repeat them, but they basically talked about how do you use tools interactively, how do you interact in heterogeneous groups, and how do you act autonomously. So a lot very similar to what I've just described. So just a different formulation. And then the Lego Foundation more recently has come up with a set of 10 skills that they highlight as being essential for teaching in their day-to-day. And these skills also are very, very similar in nature, but they talk much more on play. Because the Lego Foundation focuses on how do you teach through play. But what they're doing with that is, again, very, very similar things: complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment, service orientation, and flexibility, cognitive flexibility. So these are just some of the examples of what 21st century skills have encompass. And when you look at that and you look at the education system in most countries, India as well, but also other countries, you see that there's a huge gap between everything that I've just talked about and what children actually learn in their early years. And so I think the challenge then is, how do you bridge that gap? So I'll leave that there and let me move to the second bucket. And the second bucket is what I would call global citizenship education. And this is, again, it's been a field of study for several years, and it focuses on a range of different topics, but largely those that enable or give children a sense of the larger world that they're part of. So there is the first element of this is understanding our commonalities, us as a common humanity, right? And recognizing that there are people with very different cultural, very different social backgrounds, but they are people that inhabit the planet like we do, that they have similar aspirations, they have similar desires, and how does one actually make sense of a world where there are such differences in people, but there is this common humanity, and how does one focus on that common humanity? The second aspect of this is an appreciation for the planet, an appreciation for the sanctity of nature, of the recognition that we are living here at the mercy of nature, and that there is a collective responsibility that we have to ensure that life on Earth is sustainable. The third is what I would call reflective learning. So this is a very core part of global citizenship education, which is a recognition that to be able to make sense of the world, we have to take time out to think about our own role in the world, our actions, the effect of our actions on other people. And so that's a much more self-reflective component. Sustainable development more broadly. So how do economic activities interact with our respect for the planet? What are choices that we make in our lives, in broader societal contracts that we make that would affect this balance? Self-improvement, again, as an essential part of trying to constantly both just question but also work on making a better world. And that starts with ourselves. So how do we do that better? And then peace and nonviolence, and which is a very, very essential component of global citizenship. Again, something that is fairly intrinsic here in India to our education system and what we are taught, but again, something that is very easy to lose sight of, and as a basic pillar for a sustainable planet. The third bucket, and within global citizenship education, there is within it, but also spanning across it, is something called social emotional learning. And this was first articulated by a group called CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Action on Social Emotional Learning. And this outlines, again, similar of these efforts, but much more around building individual, social, and psychological resilience around self-awareness, which I talked about earlier, self-management. How do you develop skills that allow you to do better, to do more, to program your day? Social awareness, knowing what's happening around you. Relationship skills, also something that I've described briefly. And responsible decision-making, right? So understanding consequences of the choices we make on us as well as on people around us. So that's the second bucket. The third bucket that I will talk about is education for sustainable development. And this has two components. One is a much more of a knowledge component, which is understanding how what is happening in the world. So, we've heard the terms climate change, we've heard global warming, we've heard loss of the rainforest. But what does this mean? What are driving these changes? What is the science? What are we doing that maybe contributes to these changes or maybe reduces their impact? And how is this playing out in different parts of the world? This is again fairly technical knowledge and technical information, but it's out there, and and having a good sense of it is actually an essential part of education for sustainable development. And then the second part of it is understanding what we call green skills, right? So what is the work that we can do in the future that will actually allow us to live a much, much more sustainable life? And that will allow us to work in sectors that would actually work in harmony with nature rather than at cross purposes. And I should say, I should preface everything that I'm saying by emphasizing that none of these are easy. It's not as if one can talk about balancing environmental sustainability with economic needs and, you snap your finger and it's done. These are very, very complicated topics. And so for children, it's also important to get them used to the idea of complexity, one, and uncertainty at the other end, because we are really moving into uncharted territory. If you've been looking at the news this week, you'd see the news about the heat wave in the Pacific Northwest in North America, right? Now, this is an area that has never seen high temperatures, and they're looking at temperatures of 48, 49, 50 degrees centigrade, which are they're life-threatening temperatures. And so there is a lot of uncertainty now in terms of not just the weather patterns, but also in terms of availability of resources, availability of water, the interaction of these two. So part of the skills that children need to acquire now is comfort with ambiguity, comfort with uncertainty, and the ability to make sense of very complex phenomena while also being able to not get overwhelmed by these phenomena, not get paralyzed by the complexity, but be able to work through the complexity. And one would normally think that this kind of systems thinking is something that's taught at undergraduate or postgraduate levels, but actually research has shown that children are very, very good at picking this up. And the very early ages, you can teach complexity theory to children, and they are able to grasp it quite well. So that's the third bucket. Now, putting all of this together is not easy. But it is something that is happening in different parts of the world, and I'll be happy to talk about that in more detail. But Dr. Gandhi, I think I should stop now. I've been carrying on for quite a while, and give you a chance to ask me some questions. You're on mute.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely phenomenal how quickly you were able to cover such a complex set of issues, covering the goals of sustainable development across the world, and that are in the SDG 4.7, and that have so, as you said yourself, that they have implications for almost every other sustainable development goal. We find that the things you have mentioned. Obviously, I'm looking through the filter of children in K-12 schools across the world and across the schools that we are privy to, and the question that keeps popping up in my mind: how? Okay, all these great things, yes, of course, but how do we do it? For example, you said, well, children take very fine or easily to complexities if you introduce it to them even at early ages. So that's reassuring. But surely, somewhere or the other, there are educators across the world who are actually implementing this in the real laboratory of schools. And therefore, there is a lot of the how that's answered by them. Otherwise, looks like really a big issue. Like we should drop everything else and just do this. And even then, we may not accomplish it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think I want to pick up on the phrase that you said, that we should drop everything else. I think the sort of key to succeeding in this is actually not drop anything else. The idea here is not to replace what children are learning, but it's really to replace how they're learning this. And I'll give you a few examples of what we've seen that work around the world. The first thing that we've learned is that teachers are teachers are underappreciated around the world, and I'm a huge fan of teachers. I think they work in very difficult circumstances, and they mostly do a really great job. So I think one challenge always with trying to shift the focus in education is always that mostly these efforts are additive, right? So teachers are teaching what they're teaching, and then you tell them, well, on top of this, you need to teach them about the sustainable development goals, and on top of this, you need to teach them how to be better citizens. And at some point, teachers are going to throw their hands up and say, sorry, there's only so many hours in the day. I have to do what I have to do. So I think where the success has come is where the context has been changed. So if you're teaching children arithmetic progression, right, or geometric progression as a concept, there is no reason why you cannot frame the questions in terms of calculating extinction rates or changes in global temperatures, right? So there are ways in which math particularly lends itself to this, because all math problems can be reformulated from, I am giving my friend 2 chocolates, my friend is giving somebody else 5 chocolates, how many chocolates have passed? The kind of classic math problems that we see in textbooks can very quickly be changed into articulations around the issues that we're talking about. So whether it is about pay differences between men and women in the workplace, whether it is about calculation of daily adjusted life expectancy around health morbidity, whether it is around access to clean drinking water, in terms of extraction rates of groundwater versus replenishment rates. These are all mathematically expressible concepts. So there is no reason why children cannot be taught exactly what they're being taught in terms of functional literacy goals through the lens of sustainable development. And I think that's a key pedagogical change that is, it's not terribly hard to make. It is a little bit tough because it means, rethinking textbooks and rethinking how we articulate issues, but I don't think it is fundamentally different. The second bit is, I would say, when we're looking at subjects like geography, they lend themselves to teaching this. And I think part of the challenge is geography is often sort of what's taught in schools lags what's happening in the real world by a few decades. But I think if geography were to be taught in a much more a sort of current way, you would teach all these things as a matter of course. You would talk about sea level rises. You would talk about what's happening in the polar regions of the world. These are very standard kind of. You talk about weather patterns. I mean, that's part of geography, right? So you would talk about all of that in the context of what children are learning in their day to day. Similarly, when you look at history, one of the things that has struck all of us around the world working on these issues is that when we were learning history, the history of the 20th century, very rarely were we taught about the Spanish flu as a major pandemic. It was something that was a footnote. It was, we were taught about the wars, the big world wars. We were taught about freedom struggle here. We were taught about a lot of things, but we were not taught that up to 10 to 20 million Indians died in the Spanish flu. Now, as a history of pandemics, as a history to prepare ourselves for what can happen, and maybe we were not taught because it was thought that pandemics are behind us. We're never again going to face something like this, and here we are right in the middle of one. So there are actually historical lessons that we can take from the extinction of several ancient civilizations that are postulated to have been destroyed by climate, right? Because of an absence of harmony with nature. So there is a lot that we can integrate into our current curriculum. And I don't at all want to say that what children are being taught right now, particularly in the early years, is unimportant. Of course not. I mean, they have to learn how to, no matter what they do, none of the 21st century skills that I talked about are going to be possible if children don't know how to read, write, and do basic maths. So that's a fundamental block. What I would say is it's actually going to be far from sufficient for the kind of lives that they're going to lead when they grow up. So in a sense, we have to recognize that even what we are measuring as quality education is actually barely sufficient for what they will need in their lives later on. And again, for things like problem solving, collaboration, all of the categories that I mentioned, it's more about the way of teaching rather than, you can set a child a problem and walk the child through the steps to answer that problem, and the child will think that they know how to do it. Except when you give them a different problem, which is slightly different from the first one, right? Where they're stuck. So the essential thing then is to give them the tools that they're able to solve a family of problems with similar characteristics. For that, they have to be able to identify those similar characteristics. They have to be able to deconstruct problems in a way that allows them to see patterns, that allows them to correlate, that allows them then to think about creative solutions. So a lot of this is not about changing the what, but the how. And there are, you're absolutely right. There are lots of examples that do that. And there's a lot of literature on that. But I think changing large education systems is difficult. It takes time. It's slow. I think one of the things that has given me a lot of hope is the happiness curriculum that the Delhi government introduced 3 years ago, right? And it's a very simple thing that they've done, and it's additive, so it kind of goes against everything else that I've just been talking about. But what it does is it gives children, a framework to think about what are the sources of happiness, and use that to become a little bit more reflective about both their own lives, but also building the resilience, the emotional resilience to cope with trauma and with uncertainty moving forward. So there are steps that are possible. There are efforts that are being made, but I think it's going to be it's a big project, and it's going to take time, and it's going to roll out differently in different phases at different speeds across the world.
Yes, of course, you're right. It'll be lovely to see how educators here in India and beyond who are listening in and will be listening in, how they can get access to a repository of this kind of curriculum material. Because surely at the world level, given that SDG goals have been declared and before that Millennium Goals, which were similar on world citizenship, that we need to make sure that there's ample material so people don't have to reinvent the wheel. how to do it. And if there are video repositories of real live, schools implementing it, that would be an insight into how to go about doing things in a better way. Yes, I'm aware of your link that you shared, and I think everybody should know about, which is www.sdgacademy.org. So sdgacademy.org. And I think it's good that we all go and look in there and see what we find. But it got us a little baffled because you had mentioned that you're dealing primarily with the universities and things you were doing there. But there's also another link that you've just sent, which is mission4.7.org. So that is MISSION mission 4, as in number 4, POINT point and number 7. So .7.org. Mission4.7.org. That's great. So we'll look into that as well.
Yeah, so
And
one of the things that we are doing is actually creating this repository. There is a lot of information that's available around the world, but it's hosted by academics who are researching this. So there is a group working at Teachers College at Columbia that has a lot of work on this. There is the UNESCO Education for Sustainable Development division that has a lot of material. The OECD has a lot of material. The Ban Ki-moon Center on Global Citizens has a lot of material, but most of it, people have to search individually based on what they're interested in to get this. What we are doing, and we've really just started, so it's going to bear with us. It's going to take us a little more time to put this together. Is to create a repository where, with the links, with all the materials, so you can look at it and use whatever is appropriate, including lesson plans, including very hands-on, very immediate programs that can be implemented. And I think the challenge comes basically at two levels. The first challenge is what I would call the overarching policy challenge, which is that for schools to be able to do this, it has to be an established priority in the national curriculum. Right? It has to be something that the curriculum framework understands, appreciates, provides guidance on. So if all of this that I've talked about is completely at odds with the national curriculum, then it's highly unlikely that it'll find its way into schools, because at the end of the day, teachers teach to the syllabus and they teach to what they are expected to achieve in the year. And so there's a huge, and that's why we're working very hard with governments to say that they will make this intrinsic to their national framework. So that's kind of one level of challenge. And then the second level of challenge is what you talked about, which is, what does a teacher do? Even if a teacher wants to do it, how does one actually do it? And then there's several pieces to that. One is how the textbooks are written, how the worksheets and assessments and the problem sets are designed, how activities are designed in the classroom. So, what do you do in a classroom in your 40 minutes? How do you allocate that time? And the last bit, which I don't want to gloss over, is that this is actually much harder to do than run a traditional classroom. So a traditional classroom, typically, teacher will come, they will talk, students will take notes, they'll set them a few problems, and that's the end of the class, right? That is fairly easy for a teacher to do over time, because it is a little bit, you get used to it, you get good at it, you know what you're going to say, it's familiar. I think when we're going towards teaching 21st century skills in particular, there's a lot more uncertainty in the classroom. So just like we are changing the skills that students need, we also need to think about, we need to understand that the skills that teachers need changes as well, because then you become less a sort of a spokesperson for the information, but you become more of an orchestra conductor, right? Because what you're essentially doing is, your children are your orchestra, and you're getting all of the violinists to play together, and then you want them to be in harmony with the trumpeters, and you want them to be in harmony with the person playing the piano. And there is a rhythm, there is a cadence to that classroom, but there is also the possibility of absolute chaos. And so for a teacher to be able to manage that classroom is not easy. It's teaching is so hard, and all of us that have done it know how difficult it is. So it requires a different kind of orientation to the classroom. Just the very basic thing. If you want children to have a questioning mind, you have to be comfortable with them asking you questions in class. And that is, again, that's a departure from how a lot of classrooms are run, where a student constantly asking questions is not looked upon as being a good student. That's a problem child. And so, so you have to actually change a lot of the orientation around that. Know when to encourage that kind of questioning, when not to encourage it, how to foster teamwork, what to do when there is conflict. There'll always be conflict when there's teamwork. How do you resolve that? How do you get children to resolve it themselves? And I think that's a very, very different set of skills. I think one country that's done this fairly well, especially in the early years, is South Korea. And I think they've actually really they've internalized technology in their classrooms in a big way. And one of the consequences of internalizing technology is that students work a lot individually on their own. And so there's a lot to learn. They're also at the forefront of global citizenship education. Korea is the biggest sponsor country of this concept. And so there's a lot, I think, to learn from many different countries around the world on what works. And I would say even here, I think in India there are lots of examples of really wonderful pedagogies and ways of learning that are a little bit outside of the mainstream, but have shown enormous success. I think what stops them from being mainstream is this issue of reorienting teachers and providing teachers with the support that they need to be able to make that transition, which is really the tough thing. And if we don't have teachers that are trained, supported, equipped to do this, it's never going to make it in the classrooms.
Fabulous. It'd be lovely to know of the examples in India, because we can certainly go visit them if they allow us, and we can learn a lot from seeing a real life experiment. In South Korea example you've given is good. I wanted to share that when we are talking about literacy and its implementation, one of the things that we have found is when children are agents of change, when they get involved in a world citizen type activity, because it means expression of your service to others. And for example, when they teach a human being, whether it be a child or an adult, and we have developed a very simple set of toolkits which has some kind of books and cards, card materials and all that. So these are, like a plumber needs a toolkit, the kids need a toolkit to go and teach somebody. They can't go start from ground zero and or big thick books. So this allows them to imagine it as easy, and that's really half the battle won. And then to go and give it a try, and they find the joy of teaching and learning. And when they see the success of the learner, and the learner sees success of himself herself, you see a lot of kids getting a lot of kick out of it. And we see that youth in particular, like ages grades 6, 7, 8 and above, that this is linked to also idealism, that they have huge amounts of idealism, that they want to go serve the world, change the world, do great things. And we tend to say, no, you're supposed to learn mathematics, forget that. The other part is that, is it easy to use? Is it dead easy to go and do something like that? The easier we make it, the more chances that it'll get done. And also that the time of the teacher is not involved. Teacher simply unleashes a process. So she's busy doing what she's doing, except she allows the children to have access to these toolkits and says, go and do it. And it's a good thing. So she mentors them, or he mentors them. And we find that the children are doing a gallant job. I mean, some children have done such amazing work. There's one grade 8 child from Tiny Tots school here in Lucknow, and she taught an entire neighborhood children, like 160 children or so, that she taught using these kits, and she used them as calendars. So when we found out about her work, we went and gave her some big calendars and a stand that she can do it with, which was just holding in her hands and teaching. And there were hundreds of these kids. I mean, we found it fascinating. Another two girls from Career Convent School, they rented a hut in a slum, Juggi Jopdi, and they taught for more than a month and mainstreamed 23 out of 26 children they taught in one summer. Um, Others taught 9, 5, 1. They were just like, they were so much into it. And the only thing that stopped them was the discouragement of the adults, saying, oh, apni padhai kar lo, go and do your own studies. Why are you bothering with all that? And so forth. So I think that, the problem that I see is a problem at a societal level that we're trying to counter, because children are born without prejudice. Children already are world citizens. They don't see color. Um, and we're trying to undo that in education. Now, with this service learning component that we have put in place, we find n number of things that come out of it, which service many of the goals, not all of them, but many of the goals we have set out. It's a very simple thing. So, for example, they learn empathy, they learn kindness, they learn respect and responsibility. They learn so much from their own, from the learners, how to persist under difficulty and smile and be happy during difficulties. They learn so many values and responsibility for a human being to become, going from, conception to reality. And that is a big life skill we need to teach. You have a word problem, a problem to solve. You have to know what the problem is, and then go and find all the resources and overcome the difficulties and go solve it. So, and they're able to do that because they're able to see that learner being able to read a newspaper and write. Um, and I think these are, simple things we can think of, explore possibly, that don't take a toll on what we normally do, and then they'll get done more likely. So we've had this experiment in 13 Indian languages, where 500,000 children across the country have gone out and taught somebody. Now, some may not have taught because they took the kit and didn't do it, but majority of them did. And if they did not do it, is because we didn't motivate them properly. Otherwise, they all want to do it. It's not that they didn't want to do it. Somebody or the other didn't find them a learner. Now, of course, that's not a child's responsibility to go find a learner. An adult should help you. And so forth. So the macro climate is something, as you said, the policymakers have to decide if this is something they want to do. It has to be in their, education policies, then it'll get done. And they have to make it important. And the way to make it important also perhaps is to put it in the report card. Though I don't believe in report cards and assessments, I feel that, if we are being led so much by what the end looks like, which is the report card, and we all work towards the report card, then why not put this, a service component there? And there is there's something lacking in many countries, including our own, where we don't have the equivalent of community action service as a compulsory component. I was living in Iceland. All the students are expected to do social service uh, as part of their studies. Many countries do. Finland does. Many countries do it. So why not we? I mean, we are a developing country. These are resources waiting to act. And if they act, they will number of world citizenship skills. They will learn the sustainable goals, and they will learn the about jobs in the future. Because career should be redefined as not just doing engineering or whatever. I'm sure you've changed careers, from what I could tell. I've changed careers. I was studying physics, ended up an economist at the World Bank, and now I'm a social worker. So you can do whatever you wish. The world is free because you acquire certain core skills. So we have to think fundamentally about the syllabus, how we design it, because otherwise we're just kind of fixing, something that's not fixable in a way, or it's just having a very small impact. The whole bulk is wrong. For example, you're trying to make people collaborative learners, team players, as you said, and leaders in social service. And the whole education is organized around competition. It's just the antithesis. So how can the two coexist? You might do something. You do cooperative games. You'll do, maybe some kind of peer work and table-based work and all that. But it is not. It is not in the nature of the education to make you a team player. In fact, you would like to get the other person down because you want to succeed. So the incentives are wrong. And so we need to look fundamentally at education. If we fix education from ground zero up and make a different education, and children being naturally, actually honorable human beings, we don't need to teach them those things. We just need to nurture those things, give water to those things, give them vent for those things, and give them the environment for those things to thrive. And then we can, see that the other academic skills will also be fitting in a different way, in a better way.
Absolutely. And I think, absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the reasons why this issue is even gaining traction now is because, in a sense, the demand is coming from children. So if you look at the climate strikes and all of the work around climate change that young people are doing, they are much more passionate about it. They've taught themselves. And one of the things that we keep hearing from young people around the world is, why is this not taught in my classroom? Why am I having to learn it outside independently on my own? And so, there are lots of, and social justice, the whole social justice movement in the United States is fueled by young people's notion of of what is right and what is wrong, quite independent from what they've been taught in the school system. So I think there is very much a sort of groundswell of both recognition, and partly this is because information is free now, right? So children have, yes, of course, they learn in school, but then they also learn from all around them. They learn from their peers. They learn from what they see online. They learn from what they pick up when they read. And so I think there is a lot of there's a there's a both a lot of interest, but also a lot of intrinsic understanding of these issues amongst young people compared to people in their, let's say, 30s and above, which is a generation that didn't have the same sort of maybe it's a moment in time thing. Maybe it is that the climate crisis really is at a tipping point now. But we've seen that. So a lot of our work actually got inspired because young people came to us and said, "You're not doing anything for us." So to your point, we started off with universities because that is where our immediate mandate was. But then we found two things. First, we found that a lot of our courses were being learned by high school students. So it's not as if the material wasn't accessible to people in schools. And then the second thing was a lot of them came to us and said, why do I not learn about this in my classroom? Why didn't I learn about this in primary school? Why didn't I learn about this in middle school? And so that's what inspired us to start Mission 4.7, because we said we can't just restrict it to university students. It has to actually start much earlier. But you're right. I think the impetus, children are naturally inclined to be global citizens. That is their orientation, and then we mess them up quite systematically. So I think there's a lot to be said for doing it early, and doing it in a way that kind of encourages those natural impulses rather than curbs them.
Brilliant. Right. So, is there anything else you would like to say as we close this session? Any other burning thoughts on your mind and heart? And I think I noticed that maybe it was Tanmay trying to share our methodology or something. So, Tanmay, you want to come in now, or Chandrika? Chandrika, if you want to say some words before we share, or whichever way you wish.
Sure. I think the only thing I want to close with uh, is kind of a plea against a sort of a binary approach of basic foundational literacy versus all of this stuff that sounds very nice but seems very abstract, and second very esoteric, and sort of not quite relevant. And I think what we've found in our work so far is and also there's a lot of research that shows, a lot of research actually coming from Bhutan, that shows that children that are taught social emotional skills early on actually do much better academically. So there is an instrumentality in this also, which I didn't talk about in the beginning, because I do believe that these are valuable skills in their own right. But it is true that children that have the tools and the skills to be able to be self-motivated, to manage their emotions, to be reflective, to know how to plan, to know how to make goals, achieve those goals, all of these very basic life skills tend to do much better in life, and succeed at whatever it is that they set their minds to. So these are not binary concepts. These are kind of grounded in very old, I would say, and ancient sort of tenets of being good human beings. And I think what has happened with the formal schooling system is that it focused very much, as you said, Dr. Gandhi, on what is it that we need to do to succeed professionally as defined in a very narrow sense. But I think if we kind of, in a sense, this is a step back to say we are not only engineers or only doctors, if that is what we choose to be. We are also citizens of the world. And as citizens of the world, yes, we may change careers, but we also may, even if we don't, we are still part of a society, and we make choices and that shape that society. It's not a static. It changes continuously based on choices that individuals make. And so helping prepare people to make choices that will serve them better in the long run. And this is not about, an external group coming in and saying this is what's good for you. It's essentially every individual having the skills and the tools they need to make a craft a better future for their own little community, or their own broader community, or their own country or society. So, to my mind, there is a limit on the formal skills that we will hit at some point. Even if every child in the world knew how to read, write, and do math, which unfortunately children don't, but even if that were the case, we would hit that limit without some of these grounded skills that earlier actually were taught by the community. These were skills that you imbibed. And now, because our concept of community has changed, and because learning is kind of constrained to the school much more than a broader, extended clan, extended family, tribe, social setting, which was where young people learned life skills earlier. So I think part of it is to try and say that is a gap, to recognize that that is a gap, and to say that there are many ways of filling that gap. One is through the formal education system. It's not the only one, but one is through that system. And if that is the system in which children are spending most of their time, then we should make sure that they have access to it there. And there's one final thing I want to say, which is that post COVID, of course, there's going to be a lot of work to be done on children learning again, remembering how to learn. Basic literacy skills are being lost. All of that is, and a lot of people have talked about, a lot of educators are worried about that, and rightly so. But fundamentally, this has been a collective trauma that all of us have faced. Children more than anything, because their lives have been disrupted, and sometimes in small ways, but in a pretty fundamental way, if they're losing 1 or 2 academic years, and that interaction with their peers and their teachers. So I think, again, this only re-emphasizes the need for these tools so that they can bounce back, because this is going to change them fundamentally. Not just the disease, but the consequences of the disease as it is playing out in society. So I do think that this is also the right moment, because we are going to have to deal with children that they're scared, they're traumatized, they don't have social skills, they're struggling on a range of issues. And some of these methods, some of the happiness work, all of this can really help ground children a lot more, and basically help them come back and help them be children, which is their role right now, without taking on all of the burdens of the world. So let me stop there.
No, no, you've so much to share. There's just, we're all dying to hear more from you. And we'll probably figure out more ways to interact. I hope we'll stay back after the live session, talk for a few minutes. And Tanmay, you wanted to take over and say a few words?
Yes, ma'am. Firstly, it was a very informative session. I was sitting back here and listening to the whole chat, the conversation between you. It was a very informative session. Yeah, I shared the toolkit screen while you were telling Chandrika ma'am about the literacy toolkit material. And what I feel about the toolkit material is that after the COVID pandemic, people are more into earning their livelihoods, and so they will not be much into sending their child for a longer time, for a longer period of time to spend in education. Whereas our literacy toolkits is just a 30-hour foundational literacy and numeracy approach, which will initially help us making a child or underprivileged adult be literate in just 30 hours of education, which is a very unique approach. So I hope with this we can work together in the field of literacy and making people literate out there.
So we are
And
converting
with
into Swahili. This morning I had a meeting with Graciana, who's helping us convert into Swahili and in Spanish. And, we I think where Chandrika comes in, or the work of SDG comes in, is after they become literate. That's when you kind of teach them all these things. But why not consider teaching them with the teaching of literacy so many other things? So we can look at that. We can look at how we can collaborate, perhaps to make that foundational literacy come World Citizenship Education real, or SDG 4.7 real. It'll be a good deliberation, because actually that's what we need. When we talk about gap filling from the COVID, so a grade 6 child was at grade 4 level 2 years ago. And in grade 4, he was hardly learning anything, because we look at the ASSER data. So basically, we are talking about even grade 8 children, many of them, probably falling out of the cracks because they've not been in touch with education for these 2 years. So we'll probably have to fill many, many gaps. We have to think of, our own country or the world, the children in majority of the developing world, as being a clean slate. You'll have to begin fresh. And such an opportunity to go and fill it with the right things. And so literacy, if it can do it quickly, then we have, with the literacy and around it, we've got other goals we can also package. and so a teacher training module or something, where the teacher, the facilitator, the mentor, and the ordinary volunteer who is just an ordinary citizen of the country, taking up the charge of downloading this material or on his app or something, on his mobile and app, and then just starting with it. So basically, gap filling will not happen only by the teachers and only in school. Let's face it. If we're going to just rely upon the teachers, we're going to hit or miss a lot. Secondly, teachers are usually given the syllabus and they have to do that, and they'll be told, "Oh, quickly fix the problem and let's get on with class 8." Well, I mean, you can't. You have to give a period of time when they're coming up to the point where they can learn to read and therefore read to learn. So how to do that to get them to the FLN level so they can use FLN to learn? That is the key thing. And will it take 3 months? Will it take 6 months? Will it take a year to recover from the crises? And I think whatever time it takes, we hope it will be 3 months. We hope it will be 6 months, not more. But whatever time it takes is time well invested. We're not in a hurry. The fundamentals must be right. And that includes the fundamentals of SDG 4.7. If they are right, then you can build on that foundation almost everything else. So, Chandrika, you may have the last word. That's my last word. And then Tarmeji may close the session as he wishes. Yes.
No, I completely agree. I think it's going to be a difficult and a challenging time for everyone who's an educator moving forward for the next at least 2 years. But I have generally great hope in the resilience of people. I think that's the premise of the world, and so I think we will come back. But it's going to take a lot of collective work, and so I hope that the work of 4.7 and the resources that we're putting together will be useful. There's what's very nice for us to see is that there's so much that's already happened. But I think sometimes these things are a question of momentum. You can keep working. So UNESCO was working on its decade of education for sustainable development from 2004 to 2014. And then it really only took off a little bit later with the Sustainable Development Goals being adopted. So I think sometimes these issues of momentum take a little while to pick up, but I think we have to keep doing what we're doing, and there is so much to learn from people around. There is no one source of knowledge over here. There are so many people trying different things, and all the best to you, because I think what you're doing is really hard and really good. And we will, we'll try and help in any way that we can.
Yes, and we hope that we can work collaborative in a public mission to work upon the foundational learning skills of the children after this COVID pandemic, where the school dropouts number are more. And with this, we would like to move to the end of the session, the end of the detox session. And with this, to learn more about Global Dream 30 Hours Foundational Literacy and Numeracy approach, please visit www.globaldream.guru, or you can also WhatsApp us on 740-840-6000. I would also like to thank Ms. Chandrika for coming to our session and telling us such wonderful things in the sessions. It was really an insightful session, and thank you, Ms. Dr. Sunita Gandhi, for participating in this session as a discussant. Thank you for being there, and thank you for such an insightful session. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Tanmay.